But I go, can I just try another one? That moment comes and I just go, this is Sparta!
Gerard Butler.
He screamed, "This is Sparta," and kicked a man into a bottomless pit, and for almost 2 decades, that single moment defined how the world saw Gerard Butler. But what fans never realized is that behind that roar was a production so grueling it left actors hospitalized, pushed Butler's body past its breaking point, and nearly broke the cast before the film ever reached theaters. Now, years later, Butler has opened up about what really happened on that set, and it's nothing like the glossy, stylized war epic audiences remember. Stick around, because the real story behind 300 is far more brutal than anything that made it to the screen. When 300 hit theaters in March of 2007, almost nobody in Hollywood expected it to become the phenomenon it turned into. Directed by Zack Snyder and adapted from Frank Miller's graphic novel, the film told a hyper-stylized version of the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartan warriors held off a massive Persian army. There were no major box office stars carrying the film, no conventional historical drama pacing, just slow-motion violence, striking visuals, and a tone unlike anything mainstream audiences had seen before. Studios treated it as a gamble. Audiences treated it as something else entirely. The numbers told the real story. On a production budget of around $60 million, 300 opened to roughly $70 million in its first weekend alone, a number that stunned industry analysts. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had pulled in over $450 million worldwide, turning what many considered a risky visual experiment into one of the most profitable films of the year. It didn't just perform well financially. It reshaped how studios thought about stylized, comic book-inspired filmmaking going forward. The film's cultural footprint went well beyond the box office. The chiseled, larger-than-life physiques of the Spartan warriors, led by Gerard Butler's King Leonidas, sparked a fitness craze that outlived the movie itself. Gyms around the world began offering Spartan-inspired training programs, and the workout the cast used to prepare for their roles became something fitness enthusiasts still reference nearly 2 decades later. What most people didn't know at the time, and what Butler has only recently spoken about in real detail, is just how much pain went into creating that image on screen. Because behind the sword fights, the roaring battle cries, and the perfectly lit slow-motion carnage was a production that pushed its cast to genuine physical extremes. Injuries weren't rare accidents on the set of 300. According to Butler, they were a near-daily occurrence. He's described a set where someone was being sent to the hospital on a regular basis, whether from a mistimed fall, a weapon that got too close, or the sheer physical toll of performing the same brutal choreography over and over again. The blunted weapons used for filming were still heavy, still solid, and still capable of causing real damage when timing was off even slightly. Much of that risk came down to a creative choice Snyder made early on. Rather than relying heavily on stunt doubles, he wanted his actors performing as much of their own fight choreography as possible, believing it would make the combat feel more visceral and authentic on screen. It worked visually, but it came at a steep physical cost. Bruises, torn muscles, and cuts became part of the daily routine rather than the exception. The cast wasn't just acting exhausted in these scenes. Many of them actually were. Adding to the difficulty was the way the film was shot. Roughly 90% of what audiences see on screen relied on digital effects added later in post-production, which meant the actors spent most of their time performing intense, physically demanding combat sequences against blank blue screens, with no real environment, no real opponents, and no visual cues to react to. They had to imagine entire battles happening around them while their bodies absorbed the very real strain of the choreography. It was a strange, exhausting blend of athletic performance and pure imagination, repeated for hours at a time. If the filming itself was punishing, the preparation leading up to it was arguably even more intense. Long before cameras started rolling, Butler and his co-stars spent months training at Jim Jones under the guidance of fitness expert Mark Twight, a coach known for pushing clients far past what they believed their limits were. For Butler specifically, that meant close to 7 months of training, with individual sessions sometimes stretching past 5 or 6 hours a day. The program combined heavy strength training, brutal circuit work, sword fighting drills, and conditioning designed to simulate the demands of real combat. This wasn't a typical celebrity fitness plan built around looking good for the camera. It was designed to build functional strength and endurance that could hold up under the demands of the shoot itself. The cast flipped tires, threw kettlebells, sprinted through grueling obstacle circuits, and repeated martial arts drills until the movements became instinctive. The goal wasn't simply to sculpt an impressive physique. It was to build bodies that could physically survive the production. Butler has openly admitted that the toll of this training nearly broke him. He's spoken about developing tendinitis, hip problems, and a torn rotator cuff during the process, injuries severe enough that at certain points he could barely lift his arms above his head. And the training didn't stop once filming began. It continued alongside the shoot, with actors working out between takes just to maintain the physical look the film demanded, layering more strain onto bodies that were already exhausted from the day's fight scenes. It became, in his own description, a cycle that never really let up. What made Butler's approach stand out even among a cast that was already pushing itself physically was how far he took his preparation mentally and emotionally. He's talked about using meditation as part of his process, trying to fully step into the headspace of a man who was leading hundreds of soldiers toward almost certain death. For Butler, playing Leonidas wasn't simply a matter of hitting his marks and delivering lines with conviction. He wanted to understand, as closely as he could, what it might feel like to carry that kind of responsibility and face that kind of ending with resolve rather than fear. That level of commitment extended into his insistence on doing as much of his own stunt work as possible, despite the very real risk involved. He's described one of the film's major battle sequences as one of the most intense adrenaline experiences of his entire career, a moment where the physical exertion and emotional weight of the scene completely took over. It wasn't just performance for him. It was full immersion, and it came with consequences that followed him well beyond the production of 300, including injuries and dangerous situations on later projects that stemmed from that same willingness to throw himself fully into physically demanding roles. The environment they were filming in didn't make any of this easier. Rather than shooting on location, the entire production was filmed inside a studio in Montreal, where the cast worked for months surrounded by blue screens instead of real sets. The intense lighting required to achieve the film's distinctive, high-contrast visual style generated significant heat inside the studio, turning already exhausting shoot days into something closer to an endurance test. Butler has said he passed out on set at one point due to a combination of dehydration and overexertion, a detail that captures just how far the physical demands of the shoot pushed the people involved. Despite all of that strain, something else was quietly forming among the cast during those long, difficult months. A genuine bond built through shared suffering. Butler has spoken about how important that connection became, not just for morale, but for the authenticity of what ended up on screen. Working alongside actors like Lena Headey, David Wenham, Dominic West, and a then-rising Michael Fassbender, the cast trained together, struggled together, and leaned on each other to get through some of the hardest days of the shoot. According to Butler, that shared experience gave the on-screen brotherhood of the Spartans a weight that wouldn't have existed if the cast hadn't genuinely gone through something difficult together in real life. That off-screen camaraderie translated directly into the performances. The sense of loyalty, trust, and shared sacrifice that defines the Spartans in the film wasn't purely the product of scripting or direction. It came from a cast that had spent months training side by side, absorbing the same injuries, pushing through the same exhaustion, and building a kind of unspoken understanding that carried through into how they moved and reacted to one another on camera. The impact of 300 didn't stay contained to the film industry either. Its stylized visual approach, defined by heavy color grading, slow-motion combat, and dramatic lighting, went on to influence a wave of later films and television shows that borrowed heavily from its aesthetic. Its cultural reach extended into fitness culture as well, with the training methods used by the cast becoming widely referenced blueprints for high-intensity workout routines long after the film left theaters. The film's most famous line became a viral catchphrase that outlived the movie itself, showing up in memes, parodies, and pop culture references for years afterward. For Gerard Butler personally, 300 became the turning point of his career. Before playing Leonidas, he was a working actor with a handful of notable roles, including his performance as the title character in The Phantom of the Opera a few years earlier, but he hadn't yet had the kind of breakout role that turns an actor into a household name. That changed almost overnight with 300. The physical intensity and conviction he brought to the role established him as a leading man capable of carrying a major action film, and the offers that followed reflected that shift. In the years after 300, Butler moved between genres, proving he wasn't interested in being boxed into a single type of role. He took on romantic leads in films like P.S. I Love You, leaned into darker, morally complicated territory with Law-Abiding Citizen, and found box office success in comedies alongside actors like Katherine Heigl and Jennifer Aniston. At the same time, he kept returning to the kind of physically demanding action roles that first made him famous, eventually anchoring the long-running Fallen franchise as a hardened government agent across multiple films. Whether the project called for humor, drama, or pure physical intensity, the range he'd shown since 300 gave him the flexibility to keep working steadily across very different kinds of films. But even with everything he's done since, Leonidas remains the role most people associate him with, and it's easy to understand why. The performance wasn't built on charm or charisma alone. It was built on real physical sacrifice, months of punishing preparation, genuine injuries, and a level of commitment that pushed both his body and his mindset to their limits. What audiences saw as a stylized, almost mythic war epic was, according to the man who lived through making it, a production defined just as much by pain and endurance as by anything that ended up on screen. That's really what makes Butler's account of the production so compelling. It reframes 300 from simply being a visually striking action film into something closer to a genuine feat of physical and mental endurance for everyone involved. The slow-motion battle sequences that made the film so iconic weren't just clever direction and editing. They were the result of actors who trained like soldiers, got hurt like soldiers, and, in Butler's telling, briefly understood in a very physical, very real way what it might have felt like to stand in Leonidas's place. Looking back, it's clear that 300 succeeded not despite its brutal production, but in many ways because of it. The exhaustion, the injuries, the months of relentless training, all of it fed directly into performances that felt raw and convincing rather than choreographed and safe. Gerard Butler has made it clear in his own words that the role changed him, physically and mentally, and that the version of Leonidas audiences saw on screen was inseparable from everything he and the rest of the cast went through to bring him to life. Nearly 2 decades later, 300 still holds up as one of the more unusual box office success stories in modern Hollywood. A film built almost entirely on style, physical extremity, and commitment rather than star power or historical accuracy. And now that Gerard Butler has spoken more openly about what that commitment actually cost him and his co-stars, it's given longtime fans a much deeper appreciation for what was really happening just off camera, behind every slow-motion swing of the sword. What do you think about what Gerard Butler and the rest of the cast went through to bring 300 to life? Does knowing the real story behind the training and the injuries change the way you see the film? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this look behind the scenes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen.